Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1, the middle of chapter Kuf Chav Tes, 129. We are on page Reish Nun, 250. Okay. So, we're in the middle of discussing the distinction and the purpose of Eir HaBligvul versus Eir HaGvul. And basically, this is filling in a lot of gaps and a lot of details that were not all spelled out earlier, meaning much earlier, because this discussion was there. We discussed this at length in we call the first Masechta of Ayin Beis, from Shavuos till Vayigash Ayin Gimel. So now in Shavuos Ayin Daled, Shavuos Ayin Gimel, the Brashab began to explain that the purpose of the Eir HaBligvul, you have to say it has a purpose, because Atzmos does not have to have Eir. So what's the purpose of it? So earlier we learned that the purpose is not to radiate in the worlds, because it's beyond the worlds. On the other hand, it's a Gilui Ritzeni, it has to have a purpose. So he says the purpose is to reveal godliness and in the worlds, and to affect bittul in the worlds. That's the purpose of the Eir HaBligvul. As we explained, being that it's an Eir that's not measured by the worlds, so it's not like the instrument that the Kav Hamidah that shapes existence, and so it has the power to elevate existence. So these are the functions of these two Eirs. But this chapter, Kuf Chav Tes, the Kuf Chav Tes, he asks the question, but isn't Eir Pnimi also? The divine energy within existence also affects bittul, because it's divine energy. If you were aware of God's power within all of existence, even without Eir HaBligvul, just the measured flow, it also would affect a bittul, because you realize I'm not self-made. The Eir is what creates me, which is Eir Eliki, the Chayes Eliki, the Sorim HaMoris, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rekiya, etc. So it also affects bittul. And he explained it in more specific detail that we learned earlier in chapter 8 and chapter 48, that Atzilus has two purposes, two functions, as an interface. Again, we're talking, once God desired that there be a world that makes sense, that we have a relationship with Him, and so on. The first thing Atzilus affects is it creates the worlds. So the Eiris and Kelim of Atzilus are measured, they're Elikus, they're divine instruments, but they one God is one with His energies and with His containers, but they are already shaped in Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvul, and so they're the instruments that create. The second purpose of Atzilus is that it should bring Gilui Elikus in the world. We learned this earlier. The divine comprehension and a divine feeling. The mere fact that we can here in this existence have something that feel something edler, something more refined, something that's above us, is because there's a Gilui that's also coming out of Atzilus. That's the second purpose. And he says the first one, the creation, is primarily through the Kelim of Atzilus. The Gilui is primarily through the Eir of Atzilus, which we also learned. Though the Kelim also reveal, but Eir is the real revealer. So basically, it's like I described, it's not like two pipes. One creates and another one reveals. The same instrument that creates also it brings revelation into the world. Now, obviously, we still need Avodah, you still need to overcome the Halamas V'Asterim, etc. So we see from this that Atzilus also, which is Eir HaGvul, this is already not Eir HaBligvul, we're not talking about Eir HaSeviv, we're talking about the Eir HaGvul, the Eir Pnimi, also affects and causes bittul. So what does it mean that Eir Ein Sof is the Gilui Min Ha'etzem? Because that causes bittul. So he answered, and that's what we're in the middle of learning now. He answered the bottom of page Reish Mem Tes. Ayin who the whole gufa she'er pnimi yemer b'chol el mizgam be'el mizbiyah. That itself, that er pnimi should radiate in the worlds, even in biyah, and that there should be bittul. That itself comes from the power of Er Ein Sof. I gave an example. For example, if you have a pipe and there's a water running through the pipe, the water is coming measured to your needs. It comes into your home, to your sink, your faucet, so you have a flow of water. But for some reason the pipes get corroded or rusted. The water's coming through is not clean water. I'm not talking about other measures. So one solution is you go back to the source. You give it a surge of water, of fresh water that just flushes through the pipe and gives you now that clean water. If you let the flow continue regularly, it will continuously be affected by the Er Pnimi, so to speak. So in other words, the Er Pnimi does affect bittul, but it's because it's connected and attached to Er Bligvul that is continuously flowing through it. So it is the channel, but that's what he's saying. So in other words, the real bittul comes from a higher level. I mean, we're in the middle of the discussion. He didn't finish it. I just gave an example. So to explain this, he went back to the process of creation. I'm using an example that he doesn't use. I'm using an example. If you take a flow of wisdom, and you want to convey it in words, you take a pen. Begashmi, it's a pen. So the pen is a measuring. The pen is going to limit your flow, just like an artist uses a brush. An easel, right? And the pen, what does it do?
Easel is what you paint on.
Oh, well, that's what you paint. That's a canvas, no?
No, palette is where you take the
ink from, right? And then there's a canvas.
An easel or the...
Oh, canvas. Okay, fine. So brush. Okay, an instrument. The instrument controls that the ink doesn't just pour all over this place. It controls it. That's a kav hamida. Like a kav hamida, the same thing when you're doing cooking or anything else. A kav hamida would be a measuring rod, a measuring stick, a measuring kav is a measuring line. But you use something to take a lot, abundant volume, and you want to some way channel it. I mean, all the examples, a funnel. We're not getting into all the differences of what effect, but the best would be something that is just channeling energy. The kav, Yechsidis in Kabbalah, it says, Er Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum was Eid Malakol HaMetzias. Everywhere. Think of it, a blik vuldik, your mind is filled with infinite ideas. Obviously God is infinitely greater than anything we can imagine, but we're just giving an example. He wants to create. Creation is, we see there's a structure. Creation needs measuring. Creation needs, the flow has to be a little more, a little less. Deimim, Tzemeya, Chaim, Medaber, creating different pieces of art here. So the kav is the so-called the regulator, the filter. So it regulates the flow. So kav amida, there's a certain flow that creates existence. If you remember, we learned this at length about how maila mata, what makes something greater and something lesser. And not just in quantity. Chachma, Bina is not just diminished Chachma, but it is also diminished Chachma. Has less energy than Chachma. What makes, for example, the blood pumping from your heart go through larger arteries? Then the arteries go through veins. And the veins reach even the extremities. There's capillaries. There's a flow. And the flow gets diminished and it's opposite of diminished and increased based on the regulation of the body's structure. So this is a healthy flow. The flow is too fast or too abundant, it's not healthy. The same thing in existence. You need to have exact measured flow for a structure like ours to exist. So that measured flow, which is the kav, which is essentially the er pnimi, that's what we're learning. So that's what we speak. I'm going to read it quickly again because it's a nice visual description of, like, in other words, how existence came into being. According to the regular measured flow of the kav hamida, the Eir HaAtzilus doesn't go into biyah. Not doesn't go at all. He means to say, not as it's Atzilus, it's going to be diminished to become commensurate, to be able to enter into a lower world. It's like going to another level student. It's reaching the Atzilus, it's not going to be reach a student that's not in that level. The Eir HaAtzilus hu Eir HaKav, hanimshech me'ein sof, kamayim b'shema, milagav, the Iu Eirech Atzilus. Because Eir Atzilus is the Eir HaKav that comes from Eir Ein Sof. Like it says, the Maimon says, the Maimon Azer, or maybe, probably, Ma Lagav means that Shem Ma Lagav from within. The EU Eir Atzilus is the, how do you translate that? The path, yeah, the Eir, the path. That was the, yeah, of Atzilus. V'yadu da Kav Mistayim b'Malchus Atzilus v'Ein Mer b'Biyah. Again, we're not talking physically. We're just talking about the Kav in its full intensity really stops in Atzilus, and the rest is like a reflection of. Think of it like, even the rays of the sun. The rays of the sun, by the time they come to Earth, are far, far more diminished. The atmosphere filters out many, many things. The ozone layer, as they say. So it doesn't mean the sun doesn't reach here. But you say there's a point where the sunlight is in its full intensity if you go, let's say, out of the atmosphere, which that's why it's dangerous. You have to wear certain protective clothing.
It's actually dark there.
It's dark, but on the other hand,
it's so dark because there's nothing for the light to reflect off.
Right, yeah. But the rays, but if you're in the direction of the rays, it could affect you in visible ways. There's the ultraviolet and so on. The liyas the hamshachas hakav idea tzimtzum shenimshach el mitzumtzum lefiyarach elmas, because the transmission of the kav is through a tzimtzum. The kav itself is energy, but the energy has been affected by the tzimtzum to flow in a very regulated, focused, and targeted way. That's commensurate, tailored to the worlds. That era kav hu shenimshach. Because the Eir HaKav, that's what its purpose is. Shanim Shecher is that energy should be transmitted in a manifest way in the worlds, in Eir V'Chayis Primi, an energy and life force that's internalized, and that's through the Tzimtzum. The example in our lives is the Keiches HaNefesh. When the faculties and the Eir HaChayis HaNefesh enters each particular part of a human being, it's very commensurate to the particular elements. Because without it, it would not have been possible to have the manifestation of the infinite light in the worlds and in the containers. It's like qualifying and saying, what do you mean, it could not have been bislapshus? Didn't we learn that even before the tzimtzum, the Eir Pnimi has a root? It's already a measured Eir. God envisioned that it should measure even before the tzimtzum, in its first root and source. He's reminding us again, according to the opinion in this Hemshech, which is Ayin Beis, that he talks that Eir Pnimi has a root. In other words, in its root, it's not just pshitus, it's not just shapeless energy. That the energy itself also, all the way in its source, God envisioned Chachma, Bina, and so on. Right, the 10 hidden spheres. Nevertheless, as we've also learned, before the Tzimtzum, yes, he envisioned it, but before the Tzimtzum, it's not in any commensurate way, it's not at all proportionate to manifest in the world. The essence spheres agnuzis, as we learned earlier, that the 10 hidden spheres, even though they are mamalakalam, they are, in other words, energy that is meant to fit into a structure later, in their root and source, in their original root and source, they are relatively still like seviv compared to the kav. So once you have a combination of two factors, that the bli gvuldik energy envisioned a gvul energy. Then you take a tzimtzum that conceals the bli gvul and send the kav then will be getting instructions. The code is coming from the shadish of the Eir HaGvul. But it's in actuality, the tzimtzum is what allows it to transmit in a measured way. So it'd be like, let's say a teacher is preparing in his mind to teach a student. So he's saying, okay, I'm not going to just let it all pour out. I'm preparing an idea. But then the teacher doesn't have the discipline to control his flow. So when it comes to the teacher, there's no tzimtzum. So yes, in his mind, he wants to say something that's fitting to the student, but the suddenly starts pouring out because he didn't apply a filter. He didn't apply something that diminishes the rest of his ideas. He gets so excited, he ends up overwhelming the student anyway, even though he envisioned it. That's what he's saying. So envisioning is critical, because the other way around also won't work. If he only has a tzimtzum and he didn't envision it, then he didn't prepare himself. So he also won't accomplish the mission. I mean, it's a very, if you think about it, like I said several times, if you think in a personal way, it's really this is the science, the anatomy, the dynamics of communication, of education, of everything. That first you're preparing your mind what you want to communicate to a particular individual. And then you need also breaks to make sure that the flow is right. So some people prepare right, but they don't know how to implement it. They don't know how to actualize it. And then some people know how to actualize it, but they don't know how to prepare. So you really need like two steps. One is allocating resources and saying, okay, this is what we're going to need. Another is actually implementing it. I can tell you, I myself have made this mistake many times, not so much in teaching, but in work. You envision with your mind, like, this needs a plan, you make a plan. Comes to the Pa'el Mamish. You end up doing it not by the plan.
On the fly.
Because implementation is a whole different art. It's not just envisioning implementation. A person knows how to implement, actually does it correctly, wisely.
That means that the air pnimi is really the air group. The difference is that you are feeling it. You are having the implementation, like you said.
Yeah. Well, the beauty is like this. If you think about it, the example I gave is, if the reservoir of water is the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, think of it as an infinite reservoir. Just water everywhere. And the Tzimtzum is, let's say, the dam, or the walls, or whatever, the firewalls, whatever else you create to regulate the flow. And then come the pipes, or they come on the other side of the dam. So they're bringing that water like that. So here, according to the Shita, that air in its source is pshitas. So the reservoir is basically oblivious of what happens afterwards. It's the water, and whatever happens on the levels of the kelim, the tzimtzum, the kav, etc. But according to the opinion here is that even the reservoir, even the water before it goes out, also has within it subtly elements, particles that will later manifest. That's the chiddush of this drush, meaning that the pnimi, the structure of our existence, goes all the way into Lifnei HaTzimtzum.
It knows all the way down. It knows exactly what's going to be in Bia and everything, all the way down to detail. It's making it and illuminating whatever it has to do from the source. The pnimi knows everything, so what are the so and he also, I
don't know if I'd use the word no. I would say it's not more than no. It's shaped. The shape is there already.
Right, but it's more than no.
It's more than no. It's the essence of it.
So in other words, so what?
In other words, the individuality, diversity of existence is rooted all the way in the artist's mind before the Tzimtzum.
Fine. So and everything comes down, and how as it's coming down, it's actually creating kalim that mesh with it and beyond everything. So it's all from there, and so it's like.
But you have to break it into two parts. What I just said is Er HaGvul. Then there's another track that defines the containers themselves. That's another story.
They're growing together.
That's a different track.
It's a different track where they work together, because the air reveals the keli and the keli reveals the air. But the keli is driven, like we learned at length in the beginning, driven completely by concealment. Air is still a gili, it's just a defined gili.
But the air is
keli is just a keli without an air is just saying, I want the identity of chesed. The question is that identity also, is it in some way also within the energy of the idea? Or is the energy oblivious? That's the thing. Yeah. In other words, let's put it this way: if you're talking in comprehending God, if the idea Hashlila goes all the way to the air, is it only to the highest levels of the containers? But that's the point here.
Wow.
Yeah. What you really have is three tracks, if you want: Er HaBlikvul, Er HaGvul, and Kelim. Kelim is actually the fact that there's going to be an entity. If the air itself has gvul in it, it won't create a keli. You need another additional power. We learn this because ultimately it's energy. It's energy. It's not matter. Now matter will emerge through it, but because the air.
We learned also is that the air besides it, giving Giloyim, it's also making a structure that have Giloyim.
That's what we're. Yeah. But now he's
saying it's a different trap. I mean, I can't understand that.
The power of vision and your eye is the same thing? No. Your eye is a physical eye, and the power of vision is the power that manifests in the eye. One can't work without the other.
Okay.
That's Er and Keli, what I just said. Er Gvul and Keli Gvul. I'm not even talking about Er Bli Gvul now. The same thing, the structure of existence is that way, except it's in spiritual level. There's a container and there's an energy. The container is always the identity of something. The energy is not the identity. The energy, the chiddush here is that the energy also has elements of the identity in its subtle form. Shammai and Hillel, their minds, one was a Keli of Gvura and one was a Keli for Chesed. That's how their personalities when they were born. One second. Now they're teachers, Shmai Vavtayan teachers. And when Shammai hears the ideas, his Kelim hear Gvura, and he's more strict than that, what he hears. The Kelim of Hillel hear Chesed. If you go to Shmai Vavtayan, it's they're just sharing an idea, it's abstract. The Chadash is that even when Shmai Vavtayan are teaching in, there's already a Chesed and Gvura that's undefined yet. Now I know why it's complicated, because you want to know how it's in the source. By God, there's no kelim, there's no physical kelim. But you have to say that there's basically God wants to create keich hagvuls, to create actual defined structures. The question is how that definition affects the air. Is it just like I said with the reservoir, water just pouring and the colors of the containers tint the liquid, even though liquid is colorless, or does the liquid also have in it particles of color, which makes it far more, right? Exactly. That means individual. Let's put it in practical terms. Our individuality can mesh with the unity. Like when you think al tifresh min hatzibur, when the tzibur comes together, is there any individual left? We all know that you're now elevating to another level called community. But does any individuality left, or is it completely like? We're no longer are each of our own. An example would be when Korach brings when Moshe prays to Hashem, it says, "Al tifen el munchasam." Do not respond to their offering. Question is, their offering was a mincha. Mincha is a korban tzibur. It's not their offering. It's not a korban yachid. It's not a personal offering. It's the mincha of everybody contributed. The machzah shekel went into one pot.
It was a real pot of coal.
No, so how could Moshe be saying al tifin el munchasam? Once it's in a pot of hegdish, which means the community owns it, how could I say that your part should not be recognized? It's no longer yours. You can't take it back. So you see that even though I'm borrowing an example the Rabbi uses in a different subject.
But it's only they who put it into the pot. It's not the whole tzibur. Only those 250 that went against Moshe, of this community, these people. I'm not really sure what the raya is from there. The whole Klal Yisrael put into the pot, and then he said,
what's a korban mincha? No, the people didn't bring individual korban minchas. It was one korban mincha for Klal Yisrael.
No, but he said, Baiker v'yeda Hashem es Hashem. They should all give the dictators, whatever it is, right? And then I'll take from minchasam. They're not turning their mincha. Minchasam meant
pans, did they? They all had separate pans.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Well, this proof is brought.
Two different things, maybe.
I'm not even sure what exactly happened there.
With the Korban Mincha, it was the Torahs too. They came together, right?
Yeah, I mean we can look it up, but
mincha means they're offering.
Yes, there's nothing to know.
Huh?
Each one of them bought a kteres, their own kteres.
No, but for some reason, the Rebbe does bring this proof with the machzah shekel korban mincha is a korban tzibur. I have to look inside the parsha.
He's saying
did they bring was it a unique taters that they did just for this occasion?
Yeah.
Huh? You sure? It was not a regular process, and they were just involved in it.
Usually, just the kind Gadol doing it. His current time is that we're all.
No, I know. Of course, that's the taina, and then each one was going to bring, and we would see who responds to. Okay, you know what? Let me look it up. But that's the example the Rebbe does use. Look here. I could show it to you. Maybe you have to look inside you. See, Sefer Marim Tavshin. Right here. that red one. Tavshin Yud Aleph. It's not my example.
Tavshin, I see.
Tavshin Yud Aleph. It's a red one. No, Tavshin Yud Aleph. The last. That one.
It's a
Yeah.
shin with a little thing next to it.
That's the Rebbe's formula.
The Frierdiker Rebbe's. But the Rebbe has a harder here, which is what I'm referring to. There's the harder here. Ula yeshlim tzemein dugma l'zem b'teiru dinah. Chiv ha'machzah shekel ala yochid. Tzorich l'meisri l'kupa yofa yofa. K'dei sheitei na'asim mitziz chadasha. For hofchi is the moment sibur. Okay, so far so good. V'loi the ishtat v'shel kama yechidim. Okay, it's not made up of pieces now. It's one big. That's the machzah shekel. Shalachem mitzvah sibur. Shalachem minchas sibur nechelas. Afim gam ha'kahenim sheklin. Okay, that's the din the Mishnah Shkolim. Ubechol ze yesh kiyum l'shaychus hayachid. Imachzis hashekel shenoshon shari bikesh meisha al tifin elmen chasam. That's where I took it from. Now he brings a bit midrabah parsha Yud Ches Ches. So maybe we have to look in the Medrash. Maybe the Medrash explains it a different way, the story. But I'm just reading. That's what you're asking on. So I just assumed this was simple. Now that you're mentioning it, you're right. Practically, how did it work? Look. I mean, maybe you can look up the Medrash. We'll see it later. Anyway, look, the example is confusing. I'm not looking to bring an example that's confusing matters. The bottom line is, what I'm trying to say is that there is some element of individuality. If the Taich is Taki, Al Tifin Al Chasam, that is some general Korb Mincha, then I was just using that example that the individuality is in there somewhere, except you can't identify it in its distinct fashion. Okay, but let's go back to what we're saying
What
here.
is the other shita?
That the Elis Apshutim, that they're like I just said, a liquid that it doesn't have any color, and you put it in colored glasses, it assumes the color of the thing. I mean, we talked about Barichas about it. It's not just the technical it's different approaches in how much pshitis. It would be like in the Gein Halacha would be when you're making how important is the Kavanah Klalis and how important is the Kavanah Pratis. Because the Kavanah Pratis is important for this moment, but it's not in Etzem. It's not in Elyon. In other words, there are different ways. If you're talking about Agachover's language, you could probably come away with a whole bunch of different halachas, where here the focus is more on the prat. There's a problem. Like, the Rebbe Sich is about Yochid and Sibur, or the Kelim in the Mishkan. Once they're all in the Mishkan, is the focus on the individual Keli, or the focus on the whole Mishkan?
Because the Ayin was also included.
Maybe.
So
Yeah.
theirs. How could he split it? How could he split Ayin and them if it became one? If it became one unit, you can't split it. So it's an ayah that Yechidim have still a shaykhs to them.
So he's not talking about the individual Keteris that they brought. He's talking about the what?
Yes. But Ayin was also part of it. Ayin. So if they all become one unit, all the Yechidim now become elevated to another unit. So now how could he split the Zelt Tifin and Chasam and included Ayin was also part of that unit? So you're saying.
But you're saying it's not a unit. You said everyone brought their individual Keteris.
Terrorists, they aren't being able to different as with terrorists.
I know what you said. What you're saying is what I said before.
Yeah, once it becomes part of the Hektish, like you said before, it becomes part of Hektish, then it becomes.
But that's what I'm saying. But in this instance, they didn't. It wasn't one Bukram that they. You're saying that each the Keteris.
Each had their own.
They each had their own pan, but the Keteris themselves.
It's not a Kavan Yachid.
That's it. Okay. So they brought each their own pan,
Right.
but the Keteris, they didn't just bring Keteris on their own. The Keteris came from a public pot.
Right. But who's giving it? Who's walking?
He wants to bring it out that side the Yachid becomes elevated to another unit, a unit of a whole, but yet still there's some retention of the.
That's exactly what he wants to say.
He brings it out because Gafim Gam Hakeinim Sheiklin. You know what that means? That even if they give, they're not supposed to give Mechas HaShekel. Even if they do give, we still eat it because even if the Kainim don't eat.
Yeah. So there's many halachas that can be derived from this machlekes, or this is called machlekes. It's shittas. And chassidus bring both shittas. The Alter Rebbe, one of the things I did in the webinar, the Alter Rebbe in Tovkuf Samach Tes, Elis Tamid brings the shitta that is pshutim, and Yavil Levush Malchus, he brings the Shittas Mitziyarim. Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Rashab, they focus how the Alter Rebbe sometimes spoke this way, but it says in Samach Vov that the Alter Rebbe usually would speak according to the Shit of Eres Pshutim. That was his more common, even though he would bring the other one. And Beis is built much more on Eres Mitziyarim. The Achdus is far deeper.
It's not a contradiction.
Huh?
It's not a contradiction.
No.
It's two different.
In Tavshin Tezvav, the Rebbe said Nafabrein, and one is Milmaila, one is how you see it from Milmato. It's both are necessary, because it's like saying what's more important when you do a mitzvah, the Kavana Pratis or the Ratzon Elyon and Hashaka Deshana of a mitzvah. So there's no real answer to that. It can be, they're both depending on the situation. Look, I bring the example that Rebbe brings off in a Meitzi Echle Pochas Mekashir, when you bring Shabbos. So the Echle could be less than the shear that you're supposed to that prohibits you from carrying, but if it's even if the Keli that the Echle is in is larger, but it's bottled because you're not taking it for the container, you're taking it for the piece of food. So you see there how there the focus is far more on the why am I bringing this? Far more on the Keli than on the air. Okay.
No, on the air, yes. The Keli is low.
Yeah, you're right. The Keli is bottled to the air. Right. That's the other way around. Okay. Let's skip that. So bottom line is, all he's saying here is that it's being regulated. It's only through the tzimtzum, so we spoke. So even though it's rooted in the source, it's rooted that you have the structure of the eres, that is the energies. Nevertheless, when it comes in implementation, you need the tzimtzum to actually expose it. I want to just say one more thing about Eir and Keli. You see, if you only had, I'm talking about the Eir HaGvul and the Keli that's Gvul. If you only had the containers, what would be lacking is, and this is what needs, good thought, an explanation, is what would be lacking is, it would be like the creatures of this earth. Even less than the creatures of the earth. Imagine the inanimate objects, organic matter on this earth. So it would be an existence, it would be a whole bunch of stones that were put here but there would be no element of consciousness or awareness at all. That's what a Keli really is. A Keli is a particular entity with an identity, but has no consciousness, no awareness of anything. It's the air that creates some awareness, some gili. So if you only had air, you wouldn't have a true defined structure. It would end up being more like a structure made out of energy. You ever see like a digital image? It wouldn't be a substantial image. Now obviously Kelim and Atzilus and higher than Atzilus are not substance either. It's also digital there, so to speak. But it's the beginnings of something that diminish enough and it will become an entity that is very, very defined. And that cannot be a revelation of Elokus, because no way that God is defined by anything. The interesting thing with Eir is, on one hand, it fits into the dimensions of this substantial thing that can no way be God, but the same godliness, at the same time, it is a divine energy. And when you attribute to the divine energy particles and personality, then you really have a type of mix. This is why the opinion of those that hold the Eir Apshutim, it's not just a small matter. By them, if you make Eir has Sir, you're basically saying, God forbid, that there's a Sir in godliness, and they want to say that. So you attribute anything that is of Sir, of structure, to Kalim. And the only thing is the divine energy can energize those containers. When you attribute personality and identity to the Eir, what you're doing is you're making the Eir far more closer connected to the Kalim, but you're creating a lot more problems. It's much simpler to keep the Eir in the divine domain. And the containers are also created by the divine, but they're not divine by nature. So that's why. But that's why that's why the opinion of the Rebbe usually goes is the other way. But when this Hamshach, for sure he's using this opinion because the Agdus is far deeper. And in a way you need more Kol Yachol to make Oyer have Tzir, because you're saying it's divine, but it also has in it something, but it's not, but as we keep learning, it's not tangible until it hits the containers.
Has existence and non-existence at the same time.
Right. So according to this opinion, far more paradoxical.
Kind of a gili, as we
Yeah. So it's a gili, but at the same time, you have to always remember, even according to this opinion, it's still Oyer, it's not Keli. You have to always remember that. So it's not like you're just attributing, it still retains its Oyer properties, however, that's why the example keeps using. That's how God envisioned the structure.
You got to start after the Tzimtzum.
Emerging, but they start because there's a root of them in Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's the point.
If the art.
This was discussed at length.
Yeah. Remember, but even the according to the Shittas says Eis and Pshutim, they also
Pshutim or Mitziyarim?
Pshutim, according to that Shitta, they don't hold of the Estes Gnuzas?
No, they hold it to Kalim. Estes Gnuzas are only Kalim. Before the Pardes. It's not Shadish because there's no Air doesn't have a Shadish because
There's no different levels of
little
art.
pots.
According to that opinion,
The art is Pasha.
there's always levels, but that doesn't mean that but
We don't really understand.
diminished, not more tzir.
Lesser amounts.
Yeah,
It's nourishment.
weaker Air.
But the Shitta is that the same art basically fits in.
For example, if the air doesn't have any colors, the air can be a flood of rush of water, and then it could also still go through pipes and ultimately get into a container and be colored by the container, that even though it has no color of its own. That's the levels. The levels are far more diminished flow.
And if you're going, and the opinion of art with
Seer means that
certain waters could go into certain pipes.
No, more importantly, the air itself has in it
So
a
it has to
particular
fit
element.
into the pipe that it's going into. It has to,
They both have to fit into the pipes, but the question is whether one has.
They have to have parallel personalities, though.
Why is that? What does that mean? I'm not sure what you mean.
When you're saying they're colored, that they have to.
What's colored? The container or the energy?
The energy.
The energy doesn't have colors, but it has, according to that opinion, it has potential color. It's an abstract form.
It has a similarity to the Keli.
In certain element, yes.
So it can only fit into a Keli that has a similar personality.
Yeah,
But Eresh Pshutim also fit into that container, but it's not. But they're less connected because they don't have that personality. Yet, Eresh Pshutim, it's easier to understand. Air Pashut, yes, you could say, like we learned this before, that from Air Pashut it doesn't make a difference if it goes into Keli of Chachma or Bina. Yeah, yes. And this way it does make a difference.
This one has a target.
But it's still, even the Air Pashut that goes into Chachma, once it's a Chachma, it does follow Chachma's guidelines.
Defined by the Keli.
Yeah, but the air, it's not attributed to the air, it's attributed to the Keli.
Doesn't it make more problems for the
Anyway.
urban to fit into the Kli than the urban seer to fit into the Kli?
And each opinion has its strengths and weaknesses. There's no black and white. Each has pros and cons.
But the oil is so-called shrinking before the kalim even.
Yes, as it transmits. Yeah, so and that's what he's saying now. Valkain,
The second sheet, the Esra Spheres Agnuzis are the kalim, and this is before the tzimtzum.
Yeah. אבל יש בזה מדידה והגבולה, דהסלאפשוס יוכל להיות רק במדידה, רק במדרגה שאין הלכוס ממש. Now he's saying the other hand. Okay, so we know now is that through the tzimtzum that this regulated flow is happening. אבל יש בזה מדידה והגבולה. Precisely because it is a defined flow, a regulated flow, there's a medida והגבולה, דהסלאפשוס יוכל להיות רק במדרגה שאין הלכוס ממש. If the kav was just bringing everything, it's one thing. But the kav is a very regulated flow. So its regulated flow will only go so it's very much defined by where it's entering. That's why think of it like a teacher. He's teaching in a very defined way. This defined way fits certain students and not other students. He's not just flowing, everything is going. So the students that are not appropriate don't belong in this classroom. So therefore the kav only goes till Atzilus, like that's what he says. Shakem Atzilus and Elikus Mamish, because the kelim of Atzilus are receptacles, containers for the Elikus. The gam ad Atzilus ha'er helech mismayit, and then qualifying. But also until Atzilus, it's also been traveling and diminishing. Ukanei the gam Atzilus rak ha'oras hakav, because even Atzilus is also ha'oras hakav. Now he's adding. Before I said it was the actual flow, but he says even the tzilus is ha'ara hakav. But it's the ha'ara of the kav itself. It's not ha'ara of a ha'ara. It's not a reflection of a reflection. Like we discussed also earlier. But in biyah you cannot have the erakav. It's too intense. According to the regulated flow of the kav amida, of the measuring stick, of the measuring line. And it's only from the containers of Atzilus. The air of Atzilus remains removed. It's from the containers of Atzilus that it transmits into Biyah. Like it says, the Kalim of Atzilus, the 30 Kalim of Atzilus become the Nefesh, Ruach Neshama of Biyah. Kneda, as it's known. And also this is not from the core containers. It's only through the striking of the containers in the curtain that separates between Atzilus and Bria.
What is 30 containers of Atzilus?
It doesn't say that here, it just says it elsewhere. 30 containers in Malchus of Atzilus. There are 30 containers. And the Neshetzim Behem Biyah, that created sparks that flew into Biyah. Like it says in Eitz Chaim Shar Hashem is chapter 1. That's like a separate reflection from the Kalim. Let me just explain this piece. We learned it before. If you look all the way in chapter, I think 6, 7. Let me see. No, chapter 9. So you can look back in chapter 9 and discuss this. Discuss how the containers are formed. So you use the expression of a spark. When you look, for example, at a coal, the flame shall have a kshura begachelas. The flame is attached to the coal. Right? We learned this before. So the coal, when it's fanned, you see the coal is giving off fire. Flames shoot out from it. But let's say now you strike the coal, you see sparks. Sparks fly off. The sparks are also flame. But this is called the ha'ara nivdelis. It's still flame, but it's a flame that's not attached to the source. So basically you need that's the mashal. In the nimshal, what creates this tension? This creates this the flaring, the striking. So what happens is, what he's saying is in the Eitz Chaim is that
because the impact with it has with the paragraph.
That the kelim of Atzilus now are very powerful. They have energy. They're like the kechelis, you can say, relatively. Now they come and there's now a curtain, a thick veil between Atzilus and Biyah. The energy of the containers hit the veil. They can't just fly. It's not transparent. It's not translucent. So it sparks. It causes sparks. An example would be like a light that's striking now a barrier. Right. And the only way what the barrier does, it diffuses the light, and it shoots off. And like you see it, it's like you have things like that. You have thick curtains that cause the light to be diffused, and they come across from the other side of the curtain. You see them as like sparks, so to speak.
So the sparks is the aura.
The aura of the kelim of Atzilus that are becoming now the neshama of Biyah. Yeah. That's what he's saying here.
Is there muscle around Talmud to this?
Yeah, there's an expression, kipatish sela, what's the lashon? Kapati shifetz etzela. Rashi brings it. The Rebbe brings that there are many different interpretations in Torah. So it's like kapati shifetz etzela. You strike the stone and it shoots off.
A couple different interpretations.
So you could say in a communication with teacher and student, there are times a regular flow. That's fine. It could be a diminished flow, but it's a regular flow. And then there are times maybe there's a debate. And everyone starts arguing. Actually, what am I talking about? This example is given in chapter 9. He says when different people argue about an idea, will spark off new thoughts will come out of it. That may not even be organized. They'll just be shooting off from the original idea. That would be the example.
But that doesn't become the peninius in the shell of Biyah.
Why not?
It doesn't sound like it.
So why not? You asked for an example. It's an example. We asked an example for the sparks. Now, and those sparks turn into a world called Biyah. So Biyah has fragments of the original idea, the original light. Right there, it's a little different. Yeah. Doesn't matter, but it's basically because there's different aspects to it. I just gave it an example.
And then examples of that.
I didn't say it said exactly. Right. It's an example of how sparks fly. Listen, there are different crashes going on in Shtalshalos. This is one of them. I don't know about that. He doesn't use that word here. The parsha used earlier was letters that are not organized. It's a different Eitz Chaim. There he's using a different Eitz Chaim. Okay. So now we have basically the case that he's making here. Let's not get unfocused on what the topic is. Let's not get unfocused. The topic here is he's making a case why Eir Pnimi itself cannot create the bittul that Eir Ablikvul can create. So it goes like this. And even though we're saying that not just from the containers, but also from the energies of Atzilus, there's a sparking flying into Biyah. Like it says in a different Eitz Chaim, that's only from Bina and below in Atzilus. That's not the core of Atzilus. The Ikar Atzmus Atzilus, the primary core of Atzilus, is the level of Chachma. Like we've learned this before. We've learned that in microcosm, macrocosm, if in Atzilus you have all the 10 spheres, but if you break it down more microcosmic, Chachma is the primary force of Atzilus. Like Yud Kei Vav Kei is in all 4 worlds, but the Yud is mainly Atzilus. Hey Bina is mainly Mekanana B'Kursaya, is wedged in the seat, in the throne, in Biyah, in Bria. And you have Zah is primarily in Yetzirah, and Malchus is primarily in Asiyah. When you talk in Atzilus itself, it's Atzilus of Atzilus, there's Bria of Atzilus, there's Yetzirah and Asiyah of Atzilus. But you have to always remember, this is a common, you have to always know this, that you're not just taking 4 levels. Everything is multiple. The 4 are 4 prototypes, essentially, archetypes rather. They're general themes that, it's like saying a human being has a head, shoulders, a body, and legs. Right? But then in that itself, there's many, many inner levels within it all. It's like saying the human race, and then there's the human being in the human race. So Atzilus you talk is general, but then there's within that itself yeah. So basically, so therefore he's saying, so it's true, part of Atzilus does reflect into Biyah, but the bottom line is, it's not the way it is in Atzilus. We're talking about a different world. And he's being very precise and technical. The Ikar Atzmus Atzilus b'chinas Chachma. V'isa be'etz Chaim, the Eir Abba, in a nichnas klal b'briya. In Eitz Chaim it says that Eir Abba, the energy of Abba, which is Chachma. Abba and Ima sometimes are referred to father and mother as Chachma and Bina. Says Eir Abba, ein nichnas doesn't at all enter into Bria. Rak b'chinas Bina, misneitzes b'briya. Only from the level of Bina begins the sparking. What other words can you say for misneitzes? Flaring? Misneitzes. The Malchus, the Atzilus.
It's not shining.
No. Misneitzes here he means expression like nitzutzes. Yeah, sparks, flashes,
Sparkles.
flashes, sparkling, sparkles. Okay, so here we go. Malchus, the Malchus Datzilus. So through Malchus, the Malchus Datzilus, Bina sparkles into Biyah. So we find from all of this that in the Seder Shtalshus of things, in the regulated flow, the Eir of Atzilus does not radiate in Biyah. And this is what it says in Medrash Rabbah.
What does it mean? He said only Chokhmah, but that's the main thing of Atzilus.
Just everything we're learning here is this. Biyah is not Atzilus, that's the bottom line.
What he said from Bina, the Atzilus, isn't.
But not Chokhmah, the Iker is Chokhmah. Atzilus is mainly Chokhmah. That's the mathematics of it. Do you understand the Havana of it? If you want the Havana, you have to think in terms of a teacher and a student. Teacher, certain students will fit to this teacher. Other students won't belong in that classroom. Simple as that. Even if sparks can fly into that classroom from those ideas, but they're not recipients for that level. So just think of Seder Shtalshus as just different grades of students or different levels of achievement, where the lower levels. The key that he wants to make is that Eir Pnimi basically is subject to all these to all these regulations, which limits its ability to really create bittul in existence. That's really what he's leading to, and that the bittul is coming from the Eir Ein Sof. That's the whole. You have to always remember the flow here. Not just learning these lines. This is coming to explain in an advanced level. This is for advanced students, because he's bringing all the Eitz Chaims. He could have just skipped this whole piece and just say Eir Pnimi doesn't create bittul. Bittul comes from Eir Akif, because what causes it. But he's explaining it in detail. If you really want to work it through, as I said, the only way is to find a model of it in your life. All these levels are inside each of us right now. If you want to learn this properly, you have to take a lot more time and see how this maps out in your profile. Exactly where you are in this regard. Everybody has this in them. The question is where. No one does not have these dimensions. The Atzilus in you, the Biyah in you, all relative, obviously. But that's really the Aveda and the personal application of this, which is the key. I'm learning it now. We're learning it inside here to here. This is the we'll call the core source guide. This is the operator's manual, right? But then applying it is taking this and realizing and recognizing within us there's Atzilus, there's the Biyah. Because ultimately the goal of it all is to elevate us, refine us, and to come from a more selfish place to a more refined place, more edler place. That's what it comes down to. And there's different ways that this is achieved. So to learn this and not mention that would be a major, not just major, the whole point is being missed. So that's a critical component. To do that, however, we would have to stop to learn right now and just sit down and have some group therapy and talk about our lives. And that you find people far easier to escape and hide behind these pages and become a mathematician than to deal with it on a personal level. A real Farbrengen would be not just shooting the breeze and saying l'chaim, take a page like this and, okay, let's talk business. How does this apply to our lives? So it's not that, as I said, most people you have to be a little courageous, you have to be open and vulnerable. Obviously find people you trust that you can talk to. But that's the key. There's no hands down. If you don't do that, it's meaningless. So what's the point of knowing another madrege?
No shortcuts.
That's really the beauty of Chassidus. That's where Chassidus comes alive. When you can see and identify yourself in it, and see, then the Rebbe Rashab then speaking to you. He's not just mapping out Seder Shtalshus. It'd be like reading a electronic manual on the electrical grid that's behind the walls of this house. Who really cares? I'll pay an electrician to come in and fix the electricity. I need to know where every switch is. So why do we have to know where every switch? The only answer is because this is our electricity. You're the building here. It's not just who cares. This is us. And when you look at it that way, the whole thing changes. This is the key thing that they should have told us when we were starting to look at this, when we were 13, 14, 15. Even if we wouldn't understand it when we were 13, but one day we would. But it was never said, even when you're 20, it wasn't told us. You learn Chassidus exactly like you learn Shulchan Aruch.
They never said to incorporate with your life.
Yeah, they say, Arbe Tavzich, Daven. They never took line, attach this to you. They said, yeah, the point of all this is that you should daven with it. And then you say, okay, what am I davening with? Davening has nothing to do. Where in davening does it say this? So once in a while, a mimer takes a tefillah and explains the levels. So then, okay. Now, but if you don't understand the levels and you suck inside of you, what are you going to do? You're going to come to Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya Elam and say, okay, this is Rad Law and this is Keser Chachmeh. And I know Baruchim that did that. No, they actually did it, but then they didn't know what Rad Law meant. They just memorized that when you say Baruch Shamar, so they just replaced Baruch Shamar with Rad Law. So one guy told me, I'm saying Rad Law, Arich, Atik, Chachmeh, Binas. He just replaced the words. And he doesn't. So yeah. See, or fine, let him the kavona. The people that do that. But a real chassid would take one step. What's Rad Law inside of you? What does that mean? And you say Baruch Shamar. Now then you can understand it. Chassid, let's say someone did understand how to apply it. You could see a guy saying Baruch Shamar for 3 hours. It's not even a miracle if he did that, because he really is applying it. He's thinking about his life and where he is. It's a whole different thing. Who davens like that? You know someone? The people that try. I'm not being critical. We weren't taught. It's an art. I remember we weren't taught. It was a joke. Davening, in camp, davening was one competition. That if you don't daven loud enough, we're not going to get the points. The only time someone said something I told you meaningful to me was Binyamin Barris. He was my counselor. So he said, because he saw that I was not really into the davening, like one of us are. We were very busy sitting there, and when the head counselor would come for the mark, we'd start yelling, invite the gegangen. I mean, there was some more Kabbalah, only because, everybody had their different level. So I remember he came over to me and said to me, when you read, try to touch the words. Which made sense to me, actually. Because at least someone said to do it. No one even cared to tell us this. Instead, so I remember he said, touch the words. He says, you touch the words, you'll be able to, it's easier to daven. Because you understand, you're not just reading, you read Tillim. You're just not good off. I mean, you do it, Kabbalah says you do it. But if you understand it, it makes it a little easier to, at least to reading. I'm reading a story, I'm reading a message, I'm saying something. But we don't daven that way. How, what's the record for Shacharis? 12 minutes. 14 minutes. How fast has that been a shot? I mean, said every word. What are they, the grapevine? What do they say? What are the statistics?
We heard that in Tafshin Yud Gimel by Berchus Achama, so they was looking for somebody to daven very fast. Rabbi davened like in Hollywood till in like 12 minutes or something.
Wow.
Okay, well, he's been known to do that more than once.
No, I heard that. I mean, that's if he davened.
You've seen it first time.
That was with a minion.
I once spoke to Rabbi about this stuff, about these things. He said in Hanami, we're not just taught to discipline ourselves like that. It's emotional discipline. You understand? I was trained, or I trained myself, to stand in front of Fabrengen and just discipline my mind to listen to 4, 5, 6, whatever hours and remember it. That's also plenty rigorous. But no one trained to do the same thing in davening. It's a training. Davening is a Veda Shebelev. It's emotional. It would be the equivalent, most of us can relate to being trained to sit. Okay, maybe it's hard to imagine sitting 3 hours and learning something, but it's not out of the league. If someone trained you could do it. But emotional is a whole. Aveda Shabalev means that you have to train your heart to be focused like that. That's a whole different. No, we don't. People emotionally are very immature. You peak at around 4 years old, and you stay there, and even as your mind grows. Yeah. Yeah. It's not even chagas. Maybe they're not mature. There was a book called Emotional Intelligence. Most people, you ask them, can you grow? Everyone will say intellectually, I can grow. You can go to a class and you learn more than you knew today. You learn tomorrow. You know more tomorrow more than you knew today. Someone asks, can you grow emotionally? Most people don't even know what you're talking about. What do I mean grow emotionally? How do you grow emotionally? I'm already a mature adult, so I'm no longer a baby crying for candies. Okay, so you're an adult crying for other candies. They're not called candies. Now, can you grow emotionally? Exactly. Is there a class you can go to and my emotions are going to grow? What do I mean emotions growing? Emotions growing means that something you reacted to one way, you can react differently. More maturity. Not getting upset about things in the same way. This is not taught in schools, not in secular schools, not in Jewish schools. No one even talks about it. How do I know? I went through the system, so I know.
Why is davening set up like a conversation with God if it's all about yourself?
To me, that's a conversation with God of being yourself. What do you mean? It's not about yourself. You're not talking about how am I going to make money.
I'm saying like, okay, but the Zimmer is like praising Hashem and this, but really you're supposed to be working on, I'm saying, it's different concepts.
Let me ask you a question. Which Hashem are you praising? He's there or in here? Which Hashem are you praising? On a planet? It's a very nice word.
It's here and there.
One second. Well, these levels are within us. What do I mean within us? You were created b'tzelem Elokim. When you say praising Hashem, here, no, I know what you're saying. I know exactly what you're saying because this is the childish attitude everyone has. Praising Hashem is like saying, you're not going to say, I love you, Mr. Principal. I love you, around 50,000 different ways. Let me ask you something. What benefit exactly does God have from it, and what benefit do we have from it? So the most that someone will say is, the benefit is that you recognize that I'm not important, God is more important than me. Okay. Instead of being egocentric, you're God-centric, so to speak. You learn Chassidus, so you don't even need to learn more than 5 minutes, and you realize that the whole thing is a very childish approach. Now, yes, there's the idea that we should recognize there's a God, and we listen to a God and not to ourselves, is Aleph Beis of anything. That's called discipline, that's called mashmas, that's called respecting something that's more than you. Basically learning Aseres HaDibros. You don't need to learn anything more. God said, you want to steal, don't steal. Simple. But is that all Torah and Yiddishkeit is? The answer is no. You're now a mature adult. This you can tell a 5-year-old. Don't cross the street alone. And if you do, you'll be punished. Do this, don't do that. That's how you teach little children. As adults, it's a far more. Most of the Jewish frum adults have an attitude of like that. I won't cross the street, or if I can get away with it, I will. That type of thing. Nobody's watching. Chassidus is a whole different world. Chassidus creates a mature relationship with Eibishter, and a mature relationship requires thinking about yourself, not about yourself selfishly, about where you are. And one of the ways to do it is to realize that we were created b'tzelem Elokim. And as such, we have in ourselves Atzilus, and we have Bria and Yitzira, Asiyah. And the lower levels are far less refined. And it's a process of growth. When you're praising God, you're not praising Atzmos. You're praising God as He manifests, right? In a certain level.
So I'm saying, why is it set up?
You're not even listening to what I'm saying.
100%.
No, that's what it's set up. It's understanding what it means. It's set up in your distorted way. What you're saying, why is it set up the way I distorted it? I tell you, take away your preconceptions and read it from scratch, a new way. You're going to have to erase your hard drive. Basically, let me put it that way. First thing Chassidus says, you can't praise Atzmos. Atzmos doesn't have Tayyim. How do you call Atzmos? Chesed? What? Kale? Havaya? All these names are in levels. Everyone knows that. So what does that mean? You're not praising God. You're praising God's manifestation in existence, one way or another, which means your relationship with Him, basically. So whether it's Ir HaBligvul, Ir HaGvul. You want me to give you a whole course in davening right now?
Yeah.
Then we have to close Ayin Beis. Then it's a different class.
That is Ayin Beis, what you're saying.
No, that's not. Ayin Beis is the kavanah of Ayin Beis, but it's not the pshat of Ayin Beis.
That's what I was about to say at the beginning, that we have to incorporate one flow.
Look, I am learning Ayin Beis
Can you give us some?
for more reasons than just teaching you. I'm also learning it for me to understand it a bit. But I'm trying to point out that you have to apply it this way. To do what you guys want requires not learning it. We have to learn that in a Pedic, a section, and then sit and discuss it in context of davening and Aveda and so on. To do justice to it, it's not 5 minutes. It's hours. I'm not saying 1,000 hours, but it requires focus. What's wrong with saying that? It's a normal thing. You don't have to learn everything in one shot. We're learning, the goal of this thing is we're moving the Ayin Beis very quickly, relatively. But it's a chapter a day almost. Let's say a chapter 3 days. It's also a lot. And I've learned as I go back, I have to continuously go back again and again. It's overwhelming to really try to absorb it. To take it and apply it is really, and I wouldn't call it a beginner's class, but it's a different approach. I wouldn't necessarily, we began, Ayin Beis is Mount Everest. Ayin Beis is the deepest and highest level of Chassidus. And we're talking about not even knowing how to teach a regular simple Maimon L'Kutei Torah. Not to say it's simple in the way that I'm saying now. So you could say, why are we learning this? Why don't we go back to Maimon and Torah or a piece in Tanya, or a Maimon from the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, or whatever, and let's just apply it. We could. To me, it's etzem kshatevis b'miktsasa, it's a tevis b'klui. We can go anywhere. Anything you learn, you can do this, because it's one chassidus. It just happened to me because we're learning it, so I'm also trying to apply it. I don't see a contradiction of doing Ayin Beis and what we're talking, but if you want to do it really intensely, it would require a far more step-by-step approach. But, you see, here's where the but goes. And this is going to not make you so comfortable. I would not, then if we talk on that level, then we're talking not one-way street, not me talking. You're going to have to do more talking too. Because then it's not being applied. I would not do it in that way. I'm not going to, this we can learn in that fashion. Then what I said yesterday comes into big play, because to me, that means each of you are going to be expected to then be able to make a presentation and present it to others, and more importantly, know how to talk this way, because that I can communicate this way, good, fine. But can you? Then if we can't, we're not in the same, why are we talking about this? So I know a lot of people are very curious to know how this applies in personal growth, but to really do it, and some things that can't even be done in a group. Maybe it has to be done one-on-one. That's why you have a mashpia. Not everything has to be group therapy, Sometimes to work things through, you have to... But I could definitely demonstrate and show how you can, the stepping stones of creating the tools. This, to me, should really be turned into probably a manual even. Some step-by-step guide. Because, right now we have Bochrim, we have girls, we have everybody growing up. And they're going through the same system we went through, and going to be taught the same thing we were taught, or rather not taught.
You ever speak to educators about this?
You mean this list educators is very intriguing to me. Who's which group, which category? You mean the people who go by the name educators?
Yeah.
Oh, Shema Mushal.
Do you have an example?
If you had real educators, they wouldn't need me to speak this. They would know this on their own.
Not real educators.
So if I'm speaking to educators, it's not a good sign.
Okay, the people
Give us one example. Let's apply this.
In all the months since you've been here, you never heard one example?
Yes, I have a million times, and I've tried to think about it a bit. I don't know if I've been successful or not. I still.
But the example, you give me a little.
The first word, Baruch Shamar, that means his desire to create.
Well, we learned earlier, Baruch Shamar actually went length, what it meant.
Yes, exactly.
Baruch Shamar was a very high level. It was the first place where Allah B'rit said, right? That was where that was before Kedem Ales Haratzon. Right. I wouldn't begin there, frankly. I'd begin on a far lower level. So I know davening starts with Baruch Shamar. You know what? Let's begin there, since we say Baruch Shamar every day anyway. So.
And chapter 1, that's where it starts. That's where the whole Ayin Beis starts.
Not Baruch Shamar. No, he starts.
It doesn't mention Baruch Shamar. But it starts.
Baruch Shamar is the mems in the chapter, the mems, right?
Yeah, but it talks about. It came into the mind of God. The first few words.
So what's your point?
So I'm saying that's the way it started. You mentioned it.
I wouldn't put it quite that way. Baruch Shamar was I don't know why you're saying what you're saying. Baruch Shamar was discussed in particular.
Baruch Shamar, but that concept.
So you're connecting everything to everything. I mean,
connecting to the beginning of the mind, because he said Baruch Shamar is not a proper way to start, but in other words, it did start or something like that.
I don't know. I'm not sure what you mean, but God's desire for existence. Right. Yes.
How did we get to this?
Good, because every few times I will always point out that this has to be applied to our personal lives. It's not relevant. I didn't say it.
I think it means that the person's supposed
Anyway, I don't know if I would go to Baruch Shamar right now, because we're not learning that right now. If you ask me to explain this and where we are now, that I would do that. Baruch Shamar is another discussion, and I'd rather not go there right now, because it's going to take us off track. But bottom line, everything can be applied. And let's put it this way, you have to first register a serious way that it could be applied. Then it's just a matter of doing it. So the key thing is getting over the shock that this is relevant. So this actually is relevant. And the Rabbi Rashab didn't write it because he had nothing to do, God forbid. And he did it because of you and I, and he's speaking to you and I while we're learning this. This we can accept?
Yeah.
So that you must know that. That's a given, period. The fact that you don't understand how it's relevant that's our weakness. Now the question is, explaining it. So we've explained it. I mean, I've pointed out many. I can't say I've not talked about it. I've talked many times about it. Even by the Baruch She'amar. Remember, overall, everything is teaching us, number one, how we tick. Because anything in this process is how we process. How do things emerge from a place that's so-called was nothing and then suddenly becomes a way you express yourself to people. It's similar to the way God does it. There's stages of how everything comes into being. Number two, there's the other way around, how we elevate ourselves from where you are, and how do you get back to a more refined place. I've said this many times here, right? This is the key to the whole picture. Every step here is a step for you, a stepping stone for you to get to a more edela, more refined, more bitteldik, more committed, more loving, more healthy place. That's pretty straightforward. The challenge is to take this and decipher it. How do I explain this? Sneitzutsun, biyah. The words are very, very alien. I mean, you may be comfortable with them when but you're not comfortable with them as personal words. You'd be more comfortable that if I took this page and translated it without using any of the words here, most of you would be far more comfortable with it. But it could be translated. It could be translated. I will show you in Torah Meaning for Life.
It's like we're not comfortable reading the davening in English. It's the same idea.
But even in English, it's also somewhat.
We're not comfortable reading the davening in English.
Right,
so
yeah.
To us, it sounds right.
Yeah. So in Torah Meaning for Life, I have a chapter on God. I've told a lot of people who've asked me this question. There's a chapter on God and chapter on unity. Those two chapters are built on the deepest concepts of Samach Vov and Ayin Beis. Just read those two chapters. You tell me whether you recognize the ideas.
You know Ayin Beis then when you wrote it?
I know enough to write it, yeah. I didn't know it in this detail, but there's certain basics that are all the Maimorim. Ayin Beis is the dynamics of the interface like nowhere else. I didn't write all the dargis of Ayin Beis there, but the principle. Yeah, it's not the first time I've looked like this. Be'iyun, no, I've learned it like this. But trust me, you can learn it like this, and then we can start again. I'll also, it's endless, really. But what am I saying that? Because there is a perfect example. I took concept of Chassidus. There's not one word there from any of these pages. Someone reads it. A non-Jew can read it without knowing anything. A Jew, for that matter, and it's all there. Now, no, you're not going to find Naran of Biyah being shaped by the Kalim of Atzilus there. You're not going to find that. But the principles of the interface, the principles of how we connect, the idea of stepping stones and all that, it's all there. Now, the challenge would be, how do you take, let's say, a chapter like this, or a chapter on Baruch She'amar, or any chapter, and translate it in accessible, usable guide? That's the challenge. Now, my challenge to you is like this: if you're willing to go there has to be one condition. It's not money. The condition is that the result of our interaction has to turn into something that's written that others can benefit from. If not, I'm not willing to do that. That would be my condition. If someone wants to go on that level, it has to result in a product that's going to benefit others. Because then it's just an indulgence between me and you. I'm not, I have other things to do, and that's what I do. That's what I do. My work is to try to present it, and if we're going to use it properly, that's what needs to be done. And I think it's a pretty fair condition, because it's also going to turn it into a useful exercise. Because if we don't do that, you won't really get it. If you can't end up right, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily write the whole thing. Write up a draft, and I'll edit it. We'll work together. Anyone wants to engage me in this, I will give my time for that. So let's, since you're asking me something, I'm returning my response. Now, I do it anyway while we're learning here. You know why? Because this is being recorded, and hopefully these ideas I will write down, and I'll do the best I can. But if you want to go even further, that's the way to do it. And it's not just for my benefit. I'm talking about for your benefit and for the benefit of others, because then the idea will really shine. You see, wow, we took a chapter and we turned it into a 5-step guide. That would be a great challenge. How do you explain, let's say, the idea of Eir Keli, Eir Agvul, Eir Ablikvul in a personal guide? What difference does it make to my life? Or Atzilus B'Yitz. It doesn't really matter which chapter. You can do it with any chapter. Now, if you want to look on the site that I created called ayinbeis.com and the wiki spaces, that's exactly what I did. I took the chapters, and there's a lot of empty sections there called application and so on. So I already created the framework for it, and I've already done some of this work, but I just don't have the ability to do it myself. So what I'm doing there, at best, is summaries, and also that I'm falling behind. But I've done a lot. I've done 100 chapters and summaries and some analysis and stuff like that. But this is real apply. What I said now requires real application. This is not 5-minute work. This is hours of effort. And I'm not pressuring anybody. You have to do it, but that's the only way to really get to another level. Then you're working with it. Then you really have to understand it. Then you have to explain it, and so on. Yeah, and it can be turned into a 2-3 minute YouTube even, with one of these like chalkboards or something, where you can just really explain something in relevant terms. You'd be surprised. You don't think you're capable of doing that now, but I guarantee you can do it. But you won't do it if you're not challenged, because why would you? Most people gravitate toward what we call laziness. So, no, I'm not taking away. You're all sitting here. You come here every morning, so it's definitely a commitment. But this is a far greater commitment, because this requires already pushing yourself more than you have ever, and it's doable. I think if you had a few young Galite or Bochum or young people doing this, you would change the world. I have no doubt about it. That's how you spread Chassidus. This to me is really Futzman and Sacha Chutza. There's obviously the other side of it, Miftzayim and talking to people and so on. But this is real. This taking Chassidus and showing people how this can grow, make you grow. And again, when I say make you grow and being aware of God, it's mean the same thing. It's Hainuhach. I'm not talking about growing in a better businessman, right? We're talking about growing as a human being, as fulfilling your purpose in life, sensitive to your purpose in life, your shlichus and so on. Let's continue here. I'm glad we're talking about this. That's good. So here we go.
That's the whole purpose.
Absolutely. So anyway, v'nimtzam is the B'seder Shtalshus ein Atzilus me'er b'biyah. So we find from this that Atzilus the Eir Atzilus does not radiate in biyah. Now he's going. Zeu Shamar Azal b'Medrash Rabbi Pashavera Parsha Yud Beis Al Pasuk Kol Asher Chefetz Hashem Osa b'Shamayim ba'Aretz. So what does it say in Medrash on the pasuk? Everything God desires, He does in heaven and earth. Mashal l'melech shagazal shebnei Reimi la yerdu l'surya bnei surya la yalu l'Reimi. This everyone who learns the Kutzei Sikha should know. This Medrash. So it's a mashal of a king that decreed that the citizens of Rome should not descend to Syria, and the citizens of Syria should not ascend to Rome. So Rome and Syria are the two examples, which is interesting.
Geographically, it's
yeah, because Italy, Rome.
So Italy is higher than Syria?
Yeah, of course.
To the Romans,
North.
at least. To the Romans, at least.
What do you mean? No, but high, physically it's higher. Yeah, of course.
Oh, physically.
It's more north.
Huh? Israel is here. Syria is a little northeast to Israel. Italy is north. Is further north. Yeah.
No, Italy's totally west.
Northwest. North and far more. It's not true. You don't know the map. I see.
I don't know that.
You don't know the map. I can map it for you right now. I know the map very well.
The Mediterranean, you can take the Mediterranean straight to Italy.
You go from Syria straight west, you know where you end up? In Africa.
Not to Syria. Syria's not by the border. If you go from Israel straight west,
You go to...
Italy.
No. North.
Africa is lower than Israel.
You look at a map. What can I tell you? This is a Milsa Vida Lugluya. Look at a map. Check it out. I can tell you exactly. Italy is north and a little to the west.
Geography is less than You can bring a new opinion.
Huh?
You can.
You're right.
I'll show you. Give me a pen.
Called the Alu.
Give me the pen. Give me a pen. Yeah. Israel is here. Syria is here. Italy is here.
Yeah.
Where's the Mediterranean, though?
This.
Mediterranean is off the coast, though.
No. I'm mistaken. It's like this. This is the Mediterranean. Italy is even higher. And yeah, I know exactly where it is.
You have a map?
More north than west even. Anyway, the Medrash says that God does it. So the Medrash says a king, mashal of a king, that decreed that the citizens of Rome should not go down to Syria. Now, why the Medrash uses these examples is another discussion, but and then it continues that the king afterwards, he abolished this decree. So what's the mashal? Kach, the same thing, in the beginning of creation, the heavens belong to God. We're in the domain of God. And earth was given to humans. And by Matan Torah, God rose and abolished the decree. That means before Matan Torah, there was no ischabris of Atzilus with Biyah. So Atzilus here would be, the marshal would be Rome. Rome also means from the word Remamus. Rome is a grandson of Magdiel. It's a son of Esav. And Syria, I use this by the way because Syria is like in the Muslim world, and Rome is the father of the Western Christian world. So it's interesting.
Syria is really Ashur. It's not the Muslim world.
Not today, yeah.
It's really what?
Ashur, it's not Syria.
It's part of Greece in the time of
It kept changing hands. That's the part of the world like Israel. It's you know. So Matan Torah, what do you find? That's what it means. And that means Bnei Remi lo yardu. There was a certain domain of spirituality of the divine that did not go down into Biyah. He's back to Lavan and Yaakov. Just in case you're wondering. Says, you sighing?
Oh, sorry.
This is the Ayin where Lavan says, "If I'll not come to cross over this the Gal, right? I will not cross over, and you will not come." So, in other words, basically, Lavan, that was Lavan's intention. He wanted the compartmentalization. And Yaakov, and we learned, what did Yaakov do? He pierced the parsa. Yaakov brings an abundance from Bligvul. That's exactly where he's going here. That there's a curtain that was created that is shaped between Atzilus and Biyah. That should not transmit into Atzilus Biyah more than what is the measure.
What's the measure there?
The measure is there should be a creation of a world.
Sustain them, yeah.
Separate.
Just to sustain them.
And the same thing should be Atzilus, and also there should be no elevation of Biyah Atzilus like we learned back then with Lavan.
In other words, his concept of relationship was always his notices.
I don't know, he's not using the word isnetzitzis right now.
There shouldn't be any divine revelation. He should just be, that's it.
Even without Lavan, with existence without any effort, it has a certain diminished state from higher levels. If we do no avodah, you woke up in the morning and you just looked at the ceiling all day.
Which most of us do.
Okay, right. What happens? God created a world. There's a diminished flow coming in to create, and that's it. It stays there. I mean, yeah, right. And you dream, daydream. Before Matan Torah, there was a fundamental ceiling where you couldn't climb. That's what he's saying here. But we all have this element. I mean, to me, this is the easy part to know, the diminished. For me, it's hard to figure out how to create Gili, not how to create Helam. Helam is our status quo. Okay, right, exactly. No, my point is that there's always a minimal flow that will keep existence in existence. So, but it's like a sleep. We learned earlier that like Rosh Hashanah or Shabbos, there's Aliyah Eilimus, but you don't feel it.
It's like someone sleeping.
And God keeps. There's always. Let's put it this way. There's always the vital organs will be kept alive by God. But that's a far cry from being a human being that's aware and conscious.
Sleeping, right? He's not using his
Exactly. So most of us are asleep even when we're awake, spiritually speaking. So that's the state of concealment. That's the regular flow. If you don't do anything, that's the flow. Basically, God, if He wants to keep you here, neshama, maidani lefanecha shechzata bin nishmasi. But it's neshama ba'ape. It's the minimum. You're awoke. A baby. Talk about a baby. Babies are alive, but it's the minimal in expression. It's all the beauty that's there, but it's still not a full-blown entity that's doing what it has to do. Not learning, not connecting, not mitzvahs, and so on. So basically, that is the parsha that creates the ability for existence like this to be. Now, that's without Aveda. Lavan, as we learned, wanted to intensify this curtain and make it almost nothing should come through. But even on a basic level, even that you stay there, like we spoke about Shabbos and Chel. Shabbos is Shabbos. Once you go into the weekdays, it's not your domain. Don't bring no holiness here. When you're holy, be holy in your holy places. Don't bring holy into my mundane domain. That type of approach. Now the others obviously fought that, and they did as much as they can do before Matan Torah. Sheresh and Nevroim, they went to Biyah, or Atzilus even, but that's so both things. Atzilus shouldn't come into Biyah. So B'kriyas Yamsuf, she'echiber Atzilus Abriya, so he's asking a question. You said till Matan Torah there wasn't. What about Kriyas Yamsuf? It says elsewhere that there was a chibur of Atzilus and Bria. So there's actually two opinions. Now Rizal and the Zohar, whether Atzilus came down to Bria, basically water is Atzilus and land is Bria. In the Alma Disgali, Alma Discasi, the hidden worlds, the revealed worlds. So Kriyas Yamsuf was when you parted, the land became like water, became like land. Hofach Yom Li Abasha. So Atzilus and Bia suddenly joined. So he says, Zer Hayirak Lefisha. And that was two answers, basically. That was only temporary. And it was also preparation for Matan Torah.
Maybe it's together.
A practice dry run.
No, but even one of them would be an answer. Lefisha means wasn't a permanent, it was like a temporary thing. But at the end of the day, it was together. Yeah. The thing with Matan Torah, you could say, was also temporary, because afterwards, it's still difficult. But Matan Torah gave the power from now on that you could do it. That's the key. That you could take you can make matter into spirit. A chefza you can turn into a gavra. I'm sorry. A chefza shalchel you can turn a chefza shagdusha. It just came to me the line of Rabbi Chaim Brisker, how he defines someone that's a mess. A mess is how a gavra becomes a chefza.
This concept comes from him, no? Chefza and gavra.
They say, yeah. He was very kochzachalat in those words, yeah. I think the words exist somewhere, the words were used, but to make it into Isagavri, Isachefza, they say that by the Chaim Brisker was Gavri and Chefza, and the Ragachover was Mechadish a third, more Dakas Dikalev. There's Poil, Nifl, and Pu'ula. So Nifl is like Chefza, but it's more in terms of like when you do a mitzvah, there's the Poil, there's the Nifl, and the's the Pu'ula. That's what they always said. The Brisker was like Gavri Chefza, the individual doing, let's say, a mitzvah, and the object. By Bris Milah, it's Negeya, for example. There's the Chefza, there's the Poil, there's the Nifl, there's the Pula. Pul Nimshachas.
David Melch went into.
Yeah.
And he looked around and he said that he's.
Right, he has.
Adam Mikol HaMitzvahs.
Well, he has Mitzvah Milah, right.
So back to why uses that it's a constant thing, or it's just what happens once.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, but Matan Torah is Chadash Zayshiyah Gila Atzilus B'Biyah. Matan Torah was a Chiddush. As we'll learn, the Matan Torah is the Gili of Era Bligvul. It's a Chiddush that there was a Gili of Atzilus and Biyah. I will finish the chapter, I'll apply this, because it's not difficult to apply this piece, by the way. Here we have many examples in our lives. I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so by Matan Torah was a Chiddush. V'zeh sheyeh Gili Atzilus B'Biyah v'yeh bitla elmas. And what happened by Matan Torah? When you say Gili of Atzilus and Biyah, what exactly happened? So he's saying that sheyeh Gili Atzilus B'Biyah, this is that there should be the Gili of Atzilus B'Biyah. Yeh bitl be'elmis zeh dafke ma'atzmus era Atzilus.
That's in Yud.
Actually, I know I read the tone wrong. And what does this mean? V'zeh sheyeh Gili Atzilus B'Biyah yeh bitl be'elmis zeh dafke. This thing that happened by Matan Torah, should be a Gili of Atzilus and Biyah. There should be a bitl of elmis, because that's what Matan Torah did. Before Matan Torah, think of it like this. The regular flow of creation, so there's heaven, there's earth, everything has its place. Matan Torah created a surge. He says, what is that? That had to come from Atzmus Er Hatzilus. No longer Er Pnimi, the regular, regulated flow of the Kav. This is the third time Shlitim
Shaba'ir.
Sorry, this is the third time in Ayin Beis uses this example, maybe fourth time even. So what does it say? That Chachma is a support for a wise person more than 10 governors, 10 ministers, whatever, Shlitim, 10 rulers in the city. In other words, let's say, basically it's a mishlei, yeah? So the first is like this: when a person is a leader, and he has, let's say, 10 delegates, his wisdom is more important than the 10 people. In other words, don't just trust the people, you need to have also chachma. What does it mean, Baruchnis? The 10 governors are the 10 utterances, mamoris, the 10 expressions that God used to create the world, that came from the 10, that transmit from that draw down from the 10 spheres of Atzilus. That's the creation. So in other words, governing the city is a so-called diminished role. And that's making sure everything is all right. That would be like after the mayor or the head of the president or the head of the city came up with a plan, then he hired 10 people and delegated, and now, you take care of this department. But then when you need a special direction, or you need the original strategy, that has to come from a deeper place. Not from, in other words, functionality and maintenance. We're not talking maintenance. We're talking now, we're talking something...
Maintenance is far easier than...
Right, exactly. That's the Taka Esespheres, but it's the Chitzenis of Atzilus to maintain the flow of what goes into creation. Like he said before, Bina of Atzilus Lamata, which does not go into, only from there it goes into Biyah. There we go. Because from there comes the existence of world, the creation of the worlds. And also that there's the measure of knowledge and comprehension of the divine in the worlds. That also exists. But all on a very, let's call it basic level. It's the basic plan, not the premium plan. But now the premium goes like this. But that to be the bitl of worlds. That comes from a Gili Eira Atzilus, meaning deeper. Now you want bitl. It's not just, in other words, the bitl, the governors or the delegated administrators, they're not going to evoke bitl. The people that are maintaining the city are not going to evoke bitl. They'll evoke efficiency, some even commitment. Order. I mean, they have, but it's not
devotion.
Yeah, not that deeper. Yeah. That's the chachma toyes l'chacham. So in other words, it's a beautiful model here. You have, like he said before, in Biyah, it also gets from Eir of Atzilus, but it doesn't get Eir Abba. It only gets from Bina and lower. He says that's the 10 spheres. The external dimension, the maintenance of Biyah.
Is that like Elohim?
It doesn't say the words now, these numbers, but it could say, relatively speaking, I don't want to use something he's not saying because I'm not sure exactly. But it's definitely from the Kalim, it's more of the Kalim of Atzilus that are creating the Eir and Biyah. So what you have here is like the administrators, the 10 administrators. But Chachma Teiz L'Chacham, Chachma is the higher level that creates the Bittul. That's what we learned before. Remember we said Melagav Iyu Shema Dahi. What was the expression? The Ihu Eirech Atzilus. That's the what we call the path of Atzilus. So the Gav means within. That's Shema. If you do it, here it goes. Yeah, okay, so here answers your question. If you do it, the Shema Shu Shema Vaya B'mili Alfin Hu B'Teferes. It's known that Shema, which is number 45, is Shema Vaya B'mili Alfin. When Havaya is written like Hey Aleph, Vov Aleph Vov.
We had this once.
Yeah. Then comes the Yud. Yud Vav Dal is 20. Hey Aleph. Vav Aleph Vav and Hey Aleph. That's 45. So he says it's known that is in Teferes. That's how Havai is in Teferes. The Inya Milagav Iyu Shema. So B'chinas Hadas. We say Milagav, and from within it's Shema. What does that mean? That's the level of Das, the Moshe. Milagav, the Yaakov Milabar.
The Moshe Milagav, Yaakov.
Yeah, B'chinas Hadas. The Moshe Milagav. Moshe is on this side of it. It's basically like on the inside, and Yaakov is Milabar is on the outside. We learned this also. That Yaakov brings down to Teferes, he brings the power to pierce the Gal, the Parsa. Remember, he also said that Yaakov could not achieve with Lavan what Moshe was able to achieve with Yisrei. But Yaakov gave the power for it. He's like referring to what we learned earlier.
I'm not sure if you said it's in Teferis, now you're saying that it's in Das.
Because Teferis and Das is the same Kavim Tzoi. So Das is Moshe. Moshe is the Das, in other words, on the other side of the Kavim Tzoi, meaning Das Tat. And Yaakov is as it brings it down into the lower level. Yeah, Yaakov is Teferis, yeah. V'neged the Das mamshich me primis hakeser, and it's known that Das brings down from primis hakeser, means the primis. Ubekdei shehi amshach zeh shehi shelo yalpi adraga the says zeh idea ershe b'chinas ein sefer blikvul. So in order for there to be a transmission that is not according to the regulated flow of the cosmic order, that comes through the air that's in the form of ein sefer blikvul, which is what Moshe, by Matan Torah, and Yaakov, who prepared for Matan Torah, draw down. That's what he's alluding to. We learned this at length more about Yaakov and this, but he's connecting it all, which is very good, because that means there one second. There he spoke about the Lashon Sfira from the word Evan Sapir, Kalim Levushim. Yaakov took the Evan and made it an Evan Sapir. Okay, so to do that you need to have Amshach of Bligvul. Yes, we did learn that before. Remember, he said we need to have Amshach from a higher place to transform the lower place. And second, that's Amshach HaBligvul. Shach HaGvul, everything is a regulated flow. You don't have that element of spirits. But that's in Kalim. Yeah. So that's Kalim, the Eris. So bottom line, he answered the question. Well, he didn't explain it yet, but the bottom line is in order that bittul, he asked the question at the beginning of the chapter, doesn't air pnimi, the imminent regulated flow, also create bittul? So that bittul comes, that's through the air of the Ein Seif. Because according to the regular flow, you're going to get limited, diminished state. Essentially, Matan Torah comes from Bligvul. And the Avos, which we're going to learn soon, primarily from Eira Gvul. So that's Yaakov. But Yaakov had a taste from what would be later. That's why Kimu Kol HaTorah. Okay. Kitzer, Vadayin Tzorach Lo.
That before Matan Torah is given Amshach from Atzilus in Biyah. There was also Amshach, but it was not the.
Wasn't actualized.
It was not the.
We're going to learn. There's a whole now Arichas. He's going to talk about the difference between Avos and Matan Torah in this context. Gvul and Bligvul. Wow, okay. Kitzer. We still need to understand, isn't the imminent integrated energy also in order to cause bittul, to affect bittul? Commission is bar, commission is bar meaning le'il, explained earlier, that the interface of Atzilus is also that should bring Elikus in the world. Reveals
here we're saying that
only Eira and Sef. The Kav, because it comes through the Tzimtzum, it concludes in Atzilus. And the Nefesh Ruach Neshama of Biyah is only from the containers of Atzilus. And the air is only like sparks. So the Neshama and Nefesh Ruach Neshama of Biyah, the Eris of Biyah, come from the Kalim of Atzilus. In addition, there's also sparks that fly.
No, that means more of a pnimi, it's more slapshot.
Yeah. And sparks also come from Atzilus. That's the sparks of the Eir. That's what he says here.
It's not in addition, it's a result.
Here it looks like he's in addition. I'm thinking, because before I'm just going back. That's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah. He says it's an addition. He says first thing it comes from the kelim. He says you're right. It's the same thing. It's like the kosa, the kelim, not directly. It's through the sparks that come off the kelim. But here it's mashma that it's also from the so that's from the Kalim. But even from the Eir that's in the States, it's only from Bina. That's what we say. Yeah, but not the Biyah Kalim Datzilis. Also, the Sneitzes Ha'er Datzilis. This addition, not the Sneitzes that come, not the sparks from the containers, the sparks from the Eir. That's only from Bina. But Matan Torah is Chadash Yigili Atzilis B'Biyah, and Matan Torah was Chadash. innovated. How do you just change that? It's chadish. Unprecedented, a chidush, a new thing happened. It pioneered, innovated, or it carved, it paved a new path.
Created dimension.
She'igili eretz Atzilus b'biyah. That Atzilus should be revealed in biyah. V'hayim atzmus Atzilus. This comes from the atzmus of Atzilus. She'idei zehu abitl b'biyah. This is what causes the bitl of biyah. V'hu idei amshachas ma'atzmus ein sof. This comes from the core infinite light energy. V'hu inyan she'mad and lagav. That's a she'ma from the inside. You're
saying here that was shema demilagav. Because shema itself is having the lavar. He didn't say it before, but that was a little bit not so clear. The shema is having two parts.
He says shema melagav the ihu erech atzilus.
Yeah, but now he's saying hu inyan shema demilagav.
I understand. Which is the level of das. Shemamshir that draws from the inner dimension of Keser. So this answers, in other words, this itself of bittul of the pnimi comes from the Ein Sof.
More than a kitzur.
So 1 second. So what I was going to say in more practical terms, because this already comes from the Rebbe Sichos. The Rebbe speaks about Matan Torah a lot. You know, we all have two parts to our lives. There's a part where we are, it's called the maintenance part, the regulated flow, where you have, you go by your regular business every day, and we're talking about an ethical person who's following the Torah and following what God wants, but it's in a Tmidin Kesidran, as they say. And not mechanical even, but it's orderly. It's not Yom Kippur, it's not Shabbos, it's orderly what you do on a daily basis. Then there's a flow, and there's also a bittul, because there's a Kabbalah sale that is part of a person's life that you commit to and accept a higher will. So there's a bittul, but it's a bittul that's within the regular flow and structure. Then there comes a point in every person's life, either special days or occasions, where there's an extraordinary experience, like a Matan Torah thing, where there's suddenly a surge from another place. It could be marrying off a child, it could be a Shabbos Yom Tov, it could be marriage itself, it could be any simcha, where there's a, in the Eisius Chassidus, you'd say that instead of the regular flow going into your life, you're getting an abundant from a bligvuldika place. It's not destroying your structure, but like I said with the pipes, it's a fresh surge that's flushing through the whole system, and people feel renewed. They could feel renewed.
Your favorite term, susdel.
Yeah, it could be like Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it could be any time. Now the fact is, after Matan Torah, you can access this any minute, 24/7. Reality is, it doesn't happen every minute for most people. I mean, I guess Chassidim people daven properly. For them, like the famous story, the Chassid comes to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and it was the middle of the week, and he comes in, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, I want the Frierdiker Rebbe to say a maimer for Chassidus. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, say a maimer on Shabbos. So the Chassid answered, when I come to the Rebbe, for me it's Shabbos. So the Frierdiker Rebbe put on his kapota, and said a maimer. So it's a Gemara, Talmud Chochem Ikra Shabbos. What does that mean? That means that even the week, obviously it's not Shabbos in the halachic sense of, but the koyach of Shabbos, the energy of Shabbos, like the energy of Matan Torah, he was able to access when he saw his Rebbe. Right. Exactly. So all these aces we're talking here can be distracting, because you hear Isnei and Kalim and Naran and Biyah and Atzilus. And I'll be honest, even when I read it, it's not natural. I have to right away I translate it quickly. But that's the cheese. That you have to right away translate the words into what does it mean inside of you. And that's the challenge, because had we been taught properly, I'm also damaged goods. I went through the yeshiva system, so I'd been taught properly. I never would have attributed to Atzilus the wrong interpretation, but I did, because it wasn't taught. If it was taught lechatchila right, and someone said to me, let's imagine someone telling us when we're 10 years old, you're going to hear about this thing called Atzilus. Today you don't know what it means, but let me tell you, Atzilus means the purest you. You say it's a child the youngest age. Trust me, that child will remember that next time they hear Atzilus. But it wasn't told. Atzilus was some world out there that is like irrelevant to me, and I have to memorize this in Atzilus. Now, of course, children don't understand Ruchnis in an articulate comprehension, but there's ways to teach. So unfortunately, words are critical, and we attribute words. The same thing with davening. Davening for most people is a turn-off because they never experienced it as something they want to do. So then the Mashpim says, that's exactly why you should do it, because you don't want to do it. That's what was told to me. Which is it's not very... right. I know, but I understand what they were trying to say. Because that davening meant working yourself. But it's working yourself not because you don't want to do it, it's working yourself because working yourself is hard. Not because... that's the reason.
Don't eat the ice cream.
Right. You're actually transforming yourself.
Yeah, but it's a big difference if someone tells you daven because you don't want to do it, that's why you should do it, or because you're lazy and a person doesn't like to work on himself, and here's how you work on yourself. That's a whole different picture.
And also, when
that would be like someone, let's say lahavdil, someone says, I want to learn tennis. So he says, okay, and he starts playing. He says, I can't. It's too much for me every day. You have to do it because you don't want to do it. Who's gonna? But someone says, if you work hard, you're going to master this. It's a whole different incentive. Now, I'm not saying to daven in order you become a bigger yesh, master it. I'm trying to say you understand there's that doing something. Obviously, we all need to do sometimes things we don't like to do. That obviously. But davening is not Veda. It's a Veda Shabalev. It's not just go chop wood. It's an Aveda. It's a Sulam Mutzavatza. It's a journey from level to level to level. I could see a person have a Geshmak in davening if they really learn what it is. And Geshmak is not a contradiction. Geshmak doesn't mean Geshmak that you're doing it because you want to be more yesh. Geshmak because you actually have a personal pleasure to grow emotionally, to connect to God, to speak to God, whatever it may be.
You think Yaakov, when he's complaining that he had to spend all those cold nights tending this up, I think he loved every minute of it. I mean, there's a little rhetoric he gave Logan.
It's very comfortable for us to be sitting, as they say, Americana chocolatnikas, sitting here and eating pizza and eating sushi and with your hands and talking about Yaakov's 20 years in the...
High level, every little thing he probably was done.
There was a makova.
Well, look.
But you're right.
When you're ready to do it, then we'll talk. It's. I agree. The movie looks good. When I see it in the movie, it looks great. People, and then I see how he built a family.
I didn't think of that movie.
What about what?
I read it. I said, he
suffered. And what about
realizing maybe he didn't suffer?
And what about Yosef being sold into slavery and he thought it was dead? It was a pleasant experience. I don't think so.
He didn't get up to the...
I would not want to find out. I mean, as a father, it's not exact. I cannot see that. He was very pleased with that. No, but it's not true. But Yaakov, on his level, his father loved his son in a divine way. He wasn't loving a child is not a bad thing.
He lost his Ruach HaKodesh.
Look, I can't describe to you how it's. One second. No. One second. I can't describe to you how a tzaddik suffers, but they also suffer. It's maybe a different way of suffering. It's a far less mature suffering. But it's why would you not say they suffer? Suffering is suffering. I mean, living. Yeah, in a certain way, far more, because it's a real suffering.
Yeah.
It's not a childish suffering. Not a suffering because I'm uncomfortable. Suffering because they see, when a Rebbe like that sees a Holocaust, not just crying because some people dying. It's like God being, it's the worst possible. I mean, the depth of the. I don't think we have to deify Rebbes to the point where they don't relate to our experiences. That to me doesn't make sense. Even God, we try to say, understands our experience. But a Rebbe for sure was sent to this earth. Like someone told me, I mentioned this, the Rebbe said the world is ready for Mashiach. So I said to him, what does that mean? So he says, the Rebbe's world is not our world. And he thought he's like so-called complimenting the Rebbe. I felt, I wanted to slap the guy. I said to him, so tell me, what do we need to have a Rebbe if it's not our world? We have God. We already have a God that's in a different world. We need a person in Shama Beguf that's in like our world and live. And obviously the Rebbe is of a different world, but he's in our world helping us get to another world, not throwing him away. That's Ozav Hashem, to send the Rebbe up to heaven and say he's not of our world. To me, then all the advice the Rebbe gave us, you could say, it's the Rebbe's level. It doesn't get me. This was the first excuse people have. That I don't know what the Rebbe wants. He doesn't understand me.
Don't give him an address.
Why? Because you didn't get an answer like you got, like you liked. So he doesn't understand me. Maybe he understood you very well. He's giving you an answer what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. But this is. I said this that woman. I said it again. If you went into the Rebbe Rashab or the Rebbe or the Alter Rebbe, and you poured out your whole heart and soul and said, Rebbe, give me, I need this, I need whatever. And the Rebbe answers you, he says, here, read chapter Kuf Chof Tes and Ayin Beis. You come out of Yechidus and you say, what happened here? I mean, Chaz v'Shalom, the Rebbe didn't get me, or I didn't get him. Something is missing here. Right, exactly. She came to realize, Imreiku mikemu. You don't understand what but this is maybe, and you go to Chassidus and he tells you, yeah, every answer that you wanted is here. The Alter Rebbe's time is Likutei Eitzos. The Alter Rebbe was giving Eitzos. He was giving advice that he said because of time, not everybody can come in personally, so he's putting it in a book. The challenge is now it takes work. It takes work. The Rebbe said in the first year, they were printing Tafshin Yadav, Tafshin. In the early years, they started printing Torah Shmuel, the Rebbe Marash's Mamar. And they printed it with Rab Shmuel Sefer's Ksav. It was not, it wasn't typeset. It was handwritten. It's a clear handwriting, and you can learn it. It's not difficult to read, but still, it's not as easy.
We got used to it.
Right, exactly. And you get used to it. It's very nice, actually. It's very, Teresh Chaim was also printed. Teresh Chaim Shmois like that. I mean, technically, the reason was probably it was cheaper. They didn't have to typeset it for new. You just and his handwriting was just
changed it later.
Yeah. Now everything's but so someone said to the Rebbe, that's difficult. Why is the Rebbe making it difficult? It's hard enough to learn Chassidus. At least typeset it. So the Rebbe said this expression: sometimes you have to bring the water to the horse, and sometimes the horse has to come to the water. So the Rebbe said. So in other words, there's enough Sfarim where water is brought to you. Now you have to. Now, my point is that effort is necessary. But I have no doubt that the Rebbe Rashab spent thousands of hours writing this. It was as if he called us in and telling you this is the answers to your life's issues. For me, if someone doesn't accept that as being that's Chassidus, you might as well not learn the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing is meaningless. Rendered utterly.
Very clear.
Yeah.
That if you learn all of these things and you adjust for the Askala of it, he said very strong
Yeah.
about it.
So I have no doubt this is life transformative, and to people on our level.
He said that.
No, many times. They were very sharp about it.
Just for the
Yeah, many times. He couldn't stand it. He despised somebody. As a matter of fact, the Rashag once got drunk and said to the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rashag would get drunk. He sometimes would call pleider. That is, he would ramble. That's a little worse than that's not as bad as pleider. Talk excessively. A lot of pleider means nonsense. So the Friedrich Rebbe was there, and Friedrich Rebbe was very sharp. And he says to Friedrich Rebbe, he didn't have what to say. So the war broke out then, in the World War I, I think, broke out. Oh no, World War II broke out, whatever. So he told the Friedrich Rebbe that the Rebbe Nishmas Eden, meaning the Friedrich Rebbe's father, hated the Deutsch. Fein gehad the Deutsch. He did not like Germans. So the Friedrich Rebbe said to him, und noch mehr fein gehad, a Maskel was bringt es nicht darauf in Aved. He hated even more a person who was an intellectual that didn't bring it down into action.
Intellectual Chassidus.
Yeah, even more than because he was like, what are you telling me about the Judite?
It's not the story that the Rabbi Rashab and the Friedrich Rebbe they wrote a speech from Wilhelm, the king of Germany, and the Rabbi Rashab, I don't remember the details, was saying something. And he called them because he knew it was very suspicious. You know what I'm talking about? And the Rabbi Rashab said very strong word.
Yeah, that's a sakana is coming. Yeah.
Against the.
So let's stop here. We did chapter Kuf Chav Tes, page 249 through the top of 251.